Here we are back again talking about herbal basics. And my theme for the first three presentations has been dosage forms, so teas, tinctures, and tablets. And I'm now going to, in this brief presentation, talk about comparing doses across all the different herbal dosage forms, because it's fairly important. We'll start with a bit of an overview of why this is important. And then we need to understand how solid doses are made using herbal extracts to enable that comparison. And the concept of dried herb equivalents we'll talk about next. And then finally, I'll give you some examples to make it clear for you. So beginning with our overview, when we're prescribing for patients, it's important that we can translate doses across the different dosage forms, including even infusions and powders, as well as the standard tablets and capsules and liquids. And this is especially important when we're looking to source a particular herb, perhaps from a different company, and we want to know how their product compares with the product you might already have been used to using. So we're not just using this technique to compare across dosage forms, we're also using it to compare across product offerings from different companies. It's absolutely imperative that we know how to do this when it comes to clinical trials, because we see a clinical trial, it gives a positive result. We can only expect to reduce or reproduce the result of that clinical trial if we match the dose that was used in the trial. It's logical, makes sense. So we do need to be able to work out and replicate the trial dose in terms of whatever product we are prescribing, because it might be different to what was used in the trial. In many clinical trials, the researchers will make the product up themselves. So you can't necessarily buy that product commercially. Some are on commercial products, but they may not be available to you, might be too expensive. So how are you going to match what was used in the trial to what you want to do in your clinical practice? So the first basic concept before we can compare doses is to understand how solid doses are made using herbal extracts. So when a herb is extracted, obviously this happens in a liquid medium. And then to put that in a solid dosage form, the liquid is removed, it's evaporated away. So the liquid herbal extract is dried. And naturally, you're going to get a final amount of extract that's less than the starting weight of the original herb that was extracted. And this is because herbs contain a lot of inert material, structural elements of the plant cell that aren't going to extract in the normal media that you use, like water or water alcohol mixtures, for example. So you're going to end up with effectively a concentrate compared to the dried herb. In other words, dried extracts used for solid doses are more concentrated in activity than the original herb. And we can express this degree of concentration as what we call the extract ratio, and sometimes people call that the concentration ratio. For example, if you see that a dried extract made from a herb is 10:1, that means it's 10 times more concentrated than the original starting herb. And ideally, this sort of information should be declared on the product label, but it's not. So understanding that concept, we can now talk about the all-important concept of dried herb equivalents. This is the mechanism to achieve dosage comparison across different dosage forms. And what you're doing is you're converting all doses to a common basis. And that common basis is the amount of raw, dried herbal starting material used to make the product. Now, even if it was fresh herb was used to make the product, no problem, because you can convert that fresh herb to dried herb. And it doesn't matter what the product is. Is it a liquid, solid dosage form, a powder, tablet, capsule? You can do this dried herb equivalent calculation. And what surprises me is that, and I'll give you an example later, that even some experienced herbal clinicians are not actually all that adept at making these calculations. How do we do it? For example, if the dose of a 1 and 2 liquid is 20 to 40 ml per week, which is normally shown on labels, at least in Australia, what does that convert to as a dried herb equivalent dose per day? Because generally we're looking at DHE per day as our guiding number. Well, 20 to 40 ml per week represents around 3 to 6 ml per day, divided by 7. And since the product is a 1 and 2, you then halve that amount to get the dried herb equivalent. So that means 20 to 40 ml per week is a DHE of 1.5 to 3 grams per day of the herb. So switching over to a tablet, you must make sure, if you want the same therapeutic effect, that you're also giving that equivalent dose of 1.5 to 3 grams per day. Now, looking at tablet products, how are we going to know this? Well, the amount of starting herb will often be declared on a solid dose product label, but there are some important extra considerations, which I'll talk about soon. So let me give you a basic example across all the different dosage forms. So for a dried herb equivalent of 1 gram, the various doses of herbal preparations could be 5 ml of a 1 and 5 tincture, 2 ml of a 1 and 2 liquid extract, 1 ml of a 1 and 1 liquid extract. Now, these calculations all assume that the quality is preserved across these different dosage forms. And if there's been a soft extract, it hasn't been taken fully through to dryness, that's then been eventually dried in a tablet or capsule, and it's a 4:1, 250 milligrams of that soft extract. Or if it's a 5:1 dried extract, 200 milligrams of that dried extract in a tablet or a capsule. It becomes a little bit less certain because of the solvent change when you're looking at infusions and decoctions, but nonetheless, you can roughly apply. Perhaps sometimes there you're best to multiply the dose by 2 because of the uncertainties of the water extraction versus alcohol and water. So to understand how to dose appropriately, especially in terms of DHE, dried herb equivalents, we need to know how to read labels. So here's an example of an Australian product. And as per this example, it says contains X herb extract, in this case olive leaf, equivalent to dry 7.5 grams. So you immediately have your dried herb equivalent as 7.5 grams per capsule. So that's great. However, it's not possible to determine from this how the product was actually made. There's a missing piece of information, and that is the extract ratio. Was it 750 milligrams of a 10:1 extract or 75 milligrams of a 100:1 extract? It's useful to know, since a 10:1 extract might be quite more desirable, since an extract ratio as high as 100:1 means there's probably been some enrichment steps to achieve such a high degree of concentration from a herbal starting raw material. So generally, what they call native extracts of herbs that are made just, or dried galenicals that are made just by extracting with alcohol and water, you're generally looking at extract ratios in the range of 5 to 15:1. Anything higher than that suggests there's been some sort of extra processing of that extract. And that's fine if it preserves chemical complexity and there's clinical data to support that specific extract. But sometimes there's not, and it does raise a question mark in those cases. For example, Scutellaria bicalensis, especially the bical skullcap, does, and I know of a particular company that's putting pure bicalen into a herbal product and calling it 100-to-1 extract of Bicol skullcap, and you don't want that. So there's that missing piece of information. Now, and that's particularly the Australian scenario. Now, in the US scenario, it's something quite different. Typically, as per that example, they give you the amount of extract. So you see one capsule contains ginkgo biloba extract 120 milligrams. But they don't tell you what the extract ratio is. So your dried herb equivalence is unknown. Now, fortunately, in this case, you can see it's standardized to contain ginkgo flavone glycosides at 24%, et cetera, et cetera. You can work out that that's your standard 50-to-1 ginkgo extract. So we know that in this case, each capsule most likely contains 6 grams of a ginkgo dried herb equivalent, ginkgo leaf dried herb equivalent. But in other cases, you're completely in the dark and you don't know. And often, and this is where it's confusing, this label is good because it says ginkgo biloba extract. But on other products, it will just say ginkgo biloba, 120 milligrams. It's actually an extract in there, but you don't know that because it's not stated on the label. It's a poor state of affairs. And as I mentioned, often the extract ratio is not stated, so you don't know the dried herb equivalent. So there's quite a few tricks and issues, especially when it comes to reading labels. Now, I mentioned how even some experienced herbal clinicians don't understand and can't readily calculate dried herb equivalents and don't understand some of those issues I've just discussed about undeclared extract ratios and also extract being not mentioned on the label that was what was used. So here's an example, and this is a real life example. There was a trial in type 2 diabetes patients where the dose of Jim leaf used was 400 milligrams a day of a particular type of extract, a water-soluble acidic fraction of an ethanol extract of the leaves, mainly containing the gymnemic acids. If you dive deep into the paper, you can see that this extract was in fact a 33-to-1 concentrate from the original dried leaf. Hence, the daily DHE of the dose of gymnema leaf used in the trial was 0.4 by 33. That's 13 grams a day. And yet a colleague of mine once had a lengthy debate with a well-regarded and published US herbal educator who insisted, no, the dose of ginkgo leaf used in their trial was in fact just 400 milligrams. And you can see this is clearly going to result in serious underdosing and little chance of a meaningful therapeutic effect. So just to finish off, I'm going to give you some DHE dosage examples of herbs that can help with brain health. Take the herb bacopa. It's typically used as a 20-to-1 extract, used in daily doses of 300 to 450 milligrams a day. That's a DHE of 6 to 9 grams a day. That's most of the trials. So if you're using a 1 to 2 extract of bacopa, unless you're giving at least 10 mil per day, you're probably underdosing compared to what was used in the clinical trials. Ginkgo, as mentioned earlier, is typically the 50-to-1 extract. The daily dose is 120 to 240 milligrams per day of that extract, and that equals a DHE of 6 to 12 grams a day. And recently, an expert body said that for dementia, the dose must be at least at that 12-gram DHE or 240 milligrams of the extract. Saffron, you must use the stigma as shown in the photograph, and the DHE is quite small, 30 milligrams a day of the stigma. It's kind of like a carotenoid concentrate, that stigma. For sage, the dried herb equivalent is 2 to 3 grams per day of leaf. So thank you. And in part 4, I'll be talking about the merits and pitfalls associated with standardized extracts. So we're going to take this theme of dried extracts and concentrates further in part 4.